this is really the part of the program where we're more going to focus on what a winemaking can do. So here, it was the same fruit, just showing stylistically the changes you can make by just your yeast selection. And if you go through the wines, it seems like different wines. It would be hard-pressed to guess that they're identical in all way but the yeast we added, right? So if I can get started here. So this is probably what you need at first thing in the morning. For those of us that's rusty. But I thought as I have a little bit more time, I'm going to give you a quick recap. So aroma from wines come from mostly two sources, right? The grapes and the yeast. And why yeast can give you different expressions in different juices is because they can use different precursors that's in the matrix to give you different aromas, right? They're really influenced by the matrix they're in, and obviously fermentation conditions can also greatly impact how a yeast expresses itself. But if we think, and of course, then you have, some bacterial that can influences communities that can also influence and add some aromas to your wine sometimes. At low levels, they can add a complexity factor. At a higher levels, not so much. And then you get the whole oak influence, which is what we're ignoring today. Okay, these are all straightforward, simple wines, stainless steel to reflect the grapes, or in this case, the yeast. So we look at grape-derived. We're talking about the monoterpenes, and in general, we'll say they give you floral, fruity characters, mostly floral, more citrus. The norisopronoids give you more floral, perfumey, and the methoxypyrazines gives you really the vegetable, bell pepper, asparagus aromas. For thiols, I just said fruity. We mostly think of passion fruit first. If we think thiols, then the boxwood, the pea character, not so much, and then a little bit the citrus that can come out as well. Fermentation characters is more your fermentation esters and your higher alcohols. At low levels, these compounds give you nice fruity aromas. However, at very high levels, most things can start becoming a negative. Like higher alcohols at very high levels can start becoming pungent, chemical kind of characters. Some of them become soapy, but at low levels, many compounds are actually a positive, okay, and can add complexity. So you get your volatile phenols, once again, at low levels that can actually add some complexity. And then the sulfur compounds is not my favorite, but there's people that do really like sometimes a slight asparagus note in their Sauvignon Blancs, for instance. So why did we choose these yeasts, right? Because I think some of you are thinking, this is an interesting selection. So EC, I call it EC 1118 from my Australian days. A lot of people in the US I've heard say EC 1118, so whatever you prefer, it's the same thing. So we choose that because it's a Saccharomyces cerevisiae Baianus mix, isolated from Champagne. It can really, it's a workhorse, right? It has a very strong comparative character. It basically will win. High alcohol tolerance. It can ferment at low temperatures. We use it because for us, it is our control, okay? If something goes wrong with our control, we will be very worried and start problem solving. But if our control is performing the way we know it should, then we know whatever is happening is part of the treatment condition, of the treatment. It's not anything we need to adjust in the winery. So this is why we always use EC 1118 as one of our selections. Then CY3079, I should say. So this is Saccharomyces cerevisiae, isolated from Burgundy. It's supposed to really be complementary to the aromatic expression of white Burgundy. It does give you early yeast autolysis, so it can give you that yeast-derived characters, toasty, nutty, almond, honey characters, and it can give you a little bit of roundness in the mouth. Then we chose VL3 and QA23 because we wanted two thiol producers, okay? 2 years that's on the market specifically, marketed for Sauvignon Blanc, and what people say they will convert thiols. Okay, so VL3 is a zymoflora. It's isolated from in Bordeaux. It's supposed to really express varietal characteristics. Your boxwood, citrus, passion fruit characters. Then QA23 is Saccharomyces cerevisiae Bionis plant, once again, from Portugal. It's supposed to give you very much passion fruit characters. Okay, so for yeast that should be different, right? It'd be interesting to see what they do, giving them exactly the same grapes. So the grapes were donated by Jet Steel for Loasa Vineyard in Big Valley, AVA. If you look at it, it came in at 23.3 Brix, pH 3.9, a little bit high, TA 4.26. We did the standard winemaking you've seen the whole day. Stainless steel, straightforward, fermented at 15 degrees. An average 1 month, but there was, I will discuss, not all of them went at the same speed to complete fermentation. Just the yeast was different among the different treatments. So if you look at EC 1118, you will see the two reps. We did everything in replicates again. Very similar, okay? No differences due to replication. There's a typo, CY3079, not 19. I saw it last night. But once again, as you can see, the reps look very similar. So EC 1118 fermented to dryness in about 30 days, where for CY3079, it took about 40 days. So there is a 10-day difference in the speed of fermentation here. If you look at the next two, VL3 took around 40 days, where QA23 took around 30. Okay, so the 2 years took a little bit longer, VL3 and CY3079. The other two, QA23 and EC 1118, same speed. Just in case that makes a difference. So if we look at the wine data, you will see we acetylated. They're all around 6 grams per liter. Lowered the pH to around 3.6. The alcohols are very similar. So I feel pretty confident in saying anything that the differences that you observe in these wines are not due to basic chemical parameters, okay? So you're familiar with these ones, these PCAs by now, right? So once again, there really wasn't any methoxypyrazines in these wines. Unfortunately, it would have been great to know the thiol composition, but I don't have that method in my lab, so I couldn't run that for you. But if you look at these, so let me just quickly, yes, animation. So basically what I want to point out is, if you look at these wines, so this is just based on varietal characteristics other than thiols and fermentation esters that formed. If you look at the QA23, let's start there. You'll see that it is separate from the other two. It has more fermentation esters. So I just tasted it again, and it was slightly different from what I tasted before. But I would still say, if you look at the analysis, it's a more fruit-forward style. It will have more fermentation esters. Fruit would be more apparent. If you look at EC 1118, it has a little bit of everything. It is really a more neutral, supposed to be a more neutral style. And if you look at the left, you will see, or on your, yes, your left, CY3079 and VL3, they're together. And they're basically together because of the fact that they're more terpene orientated. They have more terpenes, they have a little bit more fatty acids and higher alcohols. Now, I would like to relate what we observe in them to their chemical parameters a little bit more than what I've done previously. We have a little bit more time in this session. So have everybody tasted these wines?
Yes, we have.
You have? Okay. So I'm going to go out on a limb and share my tasting notes with you, okay? And just remember, sensory is subjective, and there's no such thing as being wrong. This is what I tell my students. So basically, when I tasted the EC 1118 right now, we've checked again. Okay, so number one. Number one is EC 1118. if you look, so I'm going to say what I've picked up, and I probably should have said that first and then made you guess which one that is. But it really has a tropical note, apple cantaloupe. It doesn't have a huge mouthfeel for me. It doesn't pop from the glass, but for me it has an interesting mix of characters there. It'll be interesting to see which ones you prefer. Anybody noticed anything different? I mean, and all of these aromas, if you sort of look at the fermentation esters, it's sort of all sweet, fruit, apple, green undertones aromas. You could support what I'm saying here by looking at the data. But obviously it's all about matrix effects and how they synergistically impact each other.
I picked up on a little coconut for some reason.
Coconut?
Getting toward the end of the day here for me.
Anybody else notice coconut?
Oh, tropical, something tropical. Tropical fruit salad.
I mean, I personally am surprised how well the EC118 did in Sauvignon Blanc.
Oh.
Honestly, because it's not something I would usually use for Sauvignon Blanc, personally. But, you know.
So it's the exception rather than the rule, this yeast trial. But that's the whole point,
I would
right?
think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I think it performed pretty well. I think all these wines are nice, interesting, clean wines, showing really just the yeast impact and nothing else. If you look at QA23, when I tasted it now, again, for me, it is more fruit forward, which makes sense. It has more fermentation esters. If you look at the graph, it has more hexyl acetate, ethyl acetate. Now, if you hear ethyl acetate is a problem at very high levels. At low levels, it really just gives you a pleasant fruity aroma. It's not a bad thing at low levels. So for me, QA20 fruit was really more fruit forward with a little bit of floral notes in there. Anybody have any other comments? And that is, because you want to know which wine that is. Which wine is that?
Oh,
it's number 4.
The one that's more floral?
That's 4?
That's 4.
Oh, they're not in this order.
No. So if you look at this order, VL3 in QA23 was turned around.
Oh.
I looked at the bottles when they poured it.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay, pure pouring order, because I'm not going in order. I'm looking at my notes, and I'm going in my notes order.
Right.
EC118 is number 1.
Yep.
CY3079 is number 2.
Yep.
VL3 is number 3.
Okay.
Right, Joyce? QA23 is number 4.
All right.
We're just checking whether you're awake here.
Yeah.
As far as I remember, and she can correct me, I don't think we did yan adjustments. We didn't need to, right? Yeah. Did you hear that? Should I repeat that for you? Okay. So another reason, so I'm like this. When I do contract work for companies, I sort of put it there and never think about it again because I don't share much about it. But I can share this that Chick just said. So we've done some yeast trials for a lot of different international yeast companies. And very often, they will request us to compare their yeast with QA23, CY3079. Okay, that's for them the standard against which they compare how their yeasts are performing. And so this is why, this is something we use quite often in the winery, and we know what it's supposed to look like, and that's another reason why it's on the list. Also, I was asked to have at least half of the yeast have thiol converters, and CY3079 is a thiol converter. Okay. So yeah, if that makes a little bit more sense why we chose these yeasts. Okay, so EC1118, I said, tropical apple. Deborah thought a little bit of coconut, tropical aroma. I got cantaloupe. I didn't think it had a lot of mouthfeel, but not a bad wine, okay? Interesting. Then I skipped to QA23, but let's now do it in order and go to CY3079.
Okay, great.
So something interesting about this is, if you look at it, it has more terpenes. And it's also the yeast that I said you can have early yeast autolysis. So basically, it tends to give you more yeasty, bready aromas, and it can give you a little bit mouthfeel from least contact. And according to me, there is that yeasty component there, for me personally. It has, for me, a dried apricot, some tropical yeasty aromas on the nose, and then in the finish, it is more like a pineapple-y, but almost a herbal, leafy undertone. Do anybody else get that herbal, leafy?
Yeah.
So the thing that happens is people think terpenes and they just think fruity, floral, but there's some terpenes that actually do give you grassy and leafy aromas. Okay, and a good example of this is hexanol. Okay, so hexanol is not a terpene, that is actually an alcohol. Hexanol gives you some herbal aromas, and 3-hexane-1-ol also can give you some grassy, leafy aromas. So those are higher alcohols that's also present, and sometimes I think those notes can make people think that it's pyrazines, and it's not always pyrazines. It can be actually these other undertones that's present in the wine. And for this wine, it really more comes out for me on the palate and after expectoration.
Anita, I got kind of different things out of
Absolutely.
that. The CY3079 to me had a banana aroma, almost reminding me of Hefeweizen yeast, and had sort of a soapy character to it.
I mean, that's, so the banana aromas is usually more a hexyl acetate, but there's a lot of other compounds that in combination can give you those characters. So yeah, it's absolutely possible. And the soapy aromas many times come from some of your higher alcohols. Yeah, and if I just look at the analysis here, it can support any of those aromas there. And I have to say, remember, this is just a small snapshot. This is not by any means a full matrix. There's hundreds of aroma compounds in a wine, right? So this is just basically what we noticed or could actually easily qualitatively integrate in these wines. You know, I think it's about 50 compounds that we can see. It ranges between 50 and 80. In this method. So this is not by any means a complete list.
So wine number 3, are we going?
So number 3 would be VL3. So VL3 is marketed as a Sauvignon Blanc yeast. So when I tasted it now, I thought it had for me a little bit of a grassy, citrusy, note with a more subdued tropical below it. That's what I saw. It's very different from my notes from a few weeks back. So, like I said, anything is possible. I don't know what you guys have seen. What did you think?
I think my grass kind of went to hay here a little bit. I've got more to hay, to hay,
more like dried?
Yeah, more like dried grass. It's not that overt pungency, but it's there. It's almost like a secondary note of dried hay.
Yeah, I mean, I actually quite like the more citrusy, I think it was a little bit more subdued. It had some other characters other than just fruit on the palate. It was interesting.
Yeah, is there a perception of minerality here because of the elevated acidity? I mean,
You
acid
know-
and minerality are correlated, right?
This is the thing, minerality, depending on who you ask, you're going to get a
Different
different
definition, right? Well, the
Different definition. So
expression, the mineral expression from acidity,
Yes, absolutely.
as Mr. Neal would put it.
So your minerality is one of those words that I try and stay away from, just because everybody has a different definition.
Can I quote you on that, Anita? Can I quote you on that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
You know, it's just one of those things. I don't like, as a scientist, I don't like to use words that I know a lot of people, when I say that word, is going to connect a different meaning to it than I am, right?
Right, yeah.
So, whereas if I talk about a green pepper, we all know what a green pepper smells like, right? So,
Okay.
yes.
Great, fantastic.
So the last one on your list is actually then QA23, which for me was the most fruit forward of the Sauvignon Blancs in front of you at the moment, with some floral undertones. What do you think?
Yeah, it's very peachy. It's got some more of them.
I get, ripeness and weight. The mouthfeel is rich in glass. Frankly, glasses 3 and 4 have more mouthfeel, more weight to them. But I do get all that tropical fruit you were talking about in glass 4, but I also get, sort of asparagus and green olive coming through.
Wow. I get some spicy ginger. I get spice out of this wine. This is
Spicy
like
ginger?
the third time I've tasted it, and there's like a little bit of ginger on the finish that's really compelling to me. I like the finish. Great deal. So comments are open to the audience too. If you'd like to throw out some descriptors here, we're going to wrap this up shortly. So here's your opportunity.
For me, what I liked about these wines are that I went back to them several times, and my key original impression sort of stays, which ones I thought was the most fruity and which ones I thought was the more citrus-like and which one I thought had the most green type impressions. But my detailed description of the layers kept changing. And they really express differently in the nose than they do on the palate. And I find that a good thing. For me, that's complexity. It shows different layers of it and the evolution of the wine in your mouth. Yeah.
Absolutely.
I have a question for my fellow panelists, but if somebody has a question in the audience,
Yeah.
go for it.
So it depends on the yeast, but no, they don't cancel each other out. If you put them together, you're not going to get the same as the, and so winemakers feel free to interrupt me or contradict me. But what I found was that if you put them together and your controls is each one on its own, you're not going to get a blend of the two separate, right? It's not the same thing. Because what happens during fermentation, they're competing with each other. So it may be that at the start, the one actually is doing more of the work than the other, and that one actually takes over and finishes and the other one doesn't. So you don't get a 50-50 split per se of aroma compounds or whatever is happening. But it depends on the yeast, right? If you throw a really, really strong competitive yeast in with a much weaker, more gentle yeast, that yeast will have less of an impact than the second yeast. It depends on what you choose. Any winemaker want to contradict? That's just my opinion. Who said humble? In my humble opinion.
And Alder, you had a question for the
Oh
panel?
yeah, well we just did a difference in terroir tasting, and now we've just done a difference in yeast tasting, and I want to ask my panelists, where were there more differences?
It's funny, Alder. I was sitting here thinking in this tasting about your comment earlier about how Sauvignon Blanc expresses a fairly narrow, number of differences. But if somebody is really paying attention, I think that, these are kind of enormous differences. I actually thought that the terroir difference was bigger
I'll second
on the
that.
range.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yeah. I mean, these were pretty different. For me, it's amazing how much differences you get just from...
Right.
Only the yeast is different, nothing else, right? But yeah, I would say the terroir had more mouthfeel and other subtle differences as well, I would say.
Yeah, mouthfeel, maybe texturally. Yeah, absolutely. Which are two different sensory systems, right? Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
I think this is where I get up and throw my chair.
Awesome. We needed some excitement at the end of the day.
Because I get a lot more difference by the yeast. And it seems, to me, it seems quite easy to isolate the differences in these four yeasts.
Yeah, I think if somebody twisted my arm, I would end up with terroir rather than yeast differences,
Okay.
but
It's
I thought
3
it
to
was
1.
a point worth discussing.
Great, excellent.
What about a show of hands in the room?
Yeah, let's pull the room.
Who thought there were more differences by AVA? Raise your hand.
Don't be shy.
Okay, who thought there were more differences by yeast?
Yay!
All right.
Excellent tasters.
Thank you. I'll be coming
You
around.
all are
with
going
the
to be
20s
master
I promised
somms
you
very
earlier.
soon.
Great.
David
Okay.
knows who he has to fight later.
Okay, I really hate to put an end to this party, but we are going to wrap up this session. Thank you, Anita, very much for all this dedicated work that you're doing.